Surprisingly, over 90% of viewers haven't subscribed yet. If you're enjoying the content, hit that subscribe button. It motivates us to keep creating and helps us never miss an upload. And you'll never miss a story again. They say when something breaks, the pieces never quite fit the same again. But no one ever tells you about the silence in the breaking, that deep, echoing silence that follows the sound of a heart shattering. That silence became my shadow. I used to be a man who believed in simple things. I believed in showing up on time. I believed in long walks with no destination. I believed in love, not the loud, sweeping kind that movies show you, but the quiet, steady one. The kind that looks like Sunday mornings with coffee and shared glances. The kind that feels like home. Her name was Elena. She was that kind of love once. We met in autumn. The trees were shedding their gold, and something about the way she smiled made me feel like the world was still holding on to warmth. We built a life slowly, like bricks placed carefully over time. A little apartment, a shared toothbrush holder, a playlist full of songs that didn't make sense unless you knew our inside jokes. I thought we were happy. No, more than that, I thought we were whole. It started small, the unraveling. A missed call here, a late night there. She began smiling less and sighing more, but I didn't ask questions. I told myself that maybe she was tired, that work was hard, that maybe she needed space. I didn't want to intrude on her storm. But storms don't stay silent forever. One night I came home with flowers, not for any reason, just because she always loved lilies. But when I opened the door, I found silence again, the kind that wraps around your throat like smoke. Her phone buzzed on the table, and something in me, a whisper I had buried, urged me to look. I wish I hadn't. It was there in messages, words not meant for my eyes, words that turned my world into static. He called her my love. She called him home. It was not the betrayal that hurt the most. It was the realization that she had left me emotionally long before her body followed, that I had been living in the shell of something that once was, believing the echo was still the song. She came home later, smelling like unfamiliar cologne and excuses. I didn't confront her. I couldn't. I just stared at the lilies on the table and wondered how something so delicate could survive while I felt like I was crumbling inside. Days passed, then weeks. I never shouted, never threw a plate. I didn't ask her to leave. I just stopped existing around her, like a ghost haunting his own home. She eventually moved out, packing her things, like she was folding away memories that no longer served her. She said, "I hope you find happiness." I nodded. She didn't see the tears until she turned away. After she left, the apartment was too quiet. Her absence was loud. Her laughter still hung in the corners, mocking me. I slept on the couch. I stopped shaving. I stopped answering calls from friends who knew something was wrong but were too afraid to name it. But heartbreak is not a permanent place. It's a passage. One morning, I stood in front of the mirror. I looked at the man reflected back, unkempt, hollow-eyed, and lost. That wasn't me. That wasn't who I wanted to be. Pain had carved something deep inside me, yes. But maybe, just maybe, it was making room for something new. So I started walking. At first, just around the block, then through parks. I started breathing again, slowly. I let the wind fill the emptiness. I let the sky remind me that I was still alive, even if I was hurting. I picked up old books I hadn't read in years. I dusted off my guitar. I began journaling at night, scribbling my soul onto paper like a prayer to no one. The silence that once felt suffocating started to feel like space. Space to grow, to heal, to be. I didn't post about it. I didn't seek validation. I just began. Quietly, consistently. And as the seasons turned, so did I. Grief has layers. It doesn't announce its stages. But somewhere between sorrow and surrender, I found strength. Not the loud, angry kind. Not the kind that punches walls or seeks revenge. But the quiet kind. The kind that rises with the sun and chooses to begin again. Every day, I started waking up early, running, lifting, not for looks, not to prove anything, just to feel capable again. My body began to carry my heart more gently. I began to respect the vessel that held my pain and carried me through it. Work became a focus. I put everything into my job, not to distract, but to create. I poured my feelings into projects, turning deadlines into art. My manager noticed, then my clients. Promotions followed. Not overnight, but steadily. Like the way trees grow, imperceptible at first, but undeniable over time. And yet, the nights were still hard. There were moments when the bed still felt too big, when a song would come on and my throat would close, when I saw her favorite movie on TV and had to change the channel because my heart couldn't take the memories. But I didn't run from them. I let the grief pass through me like a wave, knowing it wouldn't stay forever. I forgave her, not because she asked, she never did, but because I needed to. Holding on to bitterness felt like carrying a flame inside a paper heart. Eventually, it would destroy me. So I let it go. I stopped trying to understand her choices. I stopped replaying the what-ifs. I stopped making her betrayal about my worth. That's the thing about healing. It doesn't always look like triumph. Sometimes it looks like a man sitting alone at a cafe, sipping tea and smiling, not because he's moved on, but because he's no longer anchored to the past. There was a moment, months later, when I walked past a mirror and didn't recognize myself. My eyes were clear, my posture strong. I had changed, not into someone new, but into someone more true. Pain had not broken me, it had refined me. And for the first time in a long while, I looked at my reflection and felt proud. Not because I had healed completely, but because I was healing, and that was enough. Somewhere along the way, the ache turned into something else. Not joy, not yet, but peace. A soft, quiet peace that didn't shout or demand attention. It came in small moments. The sun warming my shoulders on a cold morning, the scent of rain on the pavement, the gentle sound of my own breath in stillness. It was strange. For a long time, I thought healing would feel like triumph, like standing at the top of some mountain, arms raised high, wind rushing past me. But in truth, it felt more like sitting at the base of that mountain, quietly lacing up my boots and choosing to climb, again and again. The pain never fully disappeared, but it changed shape. It no longer lived in every room. It became a quiet guest I had learned to make tea for. I no longer fought it. I let it stay when it needed to, and I let it leave when it was ready. I began to travel. At first it was short trips, weekends away, places close enough to feel familiar, but far enough to feel new. Then, further. I stood at cliffs overlooking oceans that stretched forever. I hiked through woods where my phone lost signal and time didn't matter. I tasted dishes I couldn't pronounce and listened to stories from strangers in languages I didn't understand. And somehow, it all made me feel less alone. Because everyone, I realized, carries some kind of heartbreak. There was a woman in Florence, elderly, with kind eyes and hands that shook as she poured espresso. We spoke through gestures and broken English. I told her, without needing to say the words, that I had lost something. She touched her heart, nodded, and simply said, "Ah, love." And I understood. Grief doesn't isolate you. It connects you, if you let it. In the quiet spaces between my own thoughts, I began to feel the thread that runs through all of us. The part that hopes, the part that hurts, the part that still dares to believe. I returned home with a journal full of memories, a camera full of landscapes, and a heart that no longer felt empty. It wasn't full either, not yet, but it was open. And that was new. I started creating, painting even though I didn't know how, playing my guitar again, letting the strings carry my sadness and my softness. I built a tiny bookshelf with my own hands, something solid, something useful, something I could point to and say, I made this. It felt symbolic. My career took off in ways I hadn't expected. When I started healing myself, it was as if the world noticed. Not because I was chasing success, but because I had become present. I listened more. I led with calm instead of control. People felt it. Opportunities came not forced, but drawn. But it wasn't about the success anymore. I began volunteering on Sundays at a local shelter. I met people whose stories were stitched with pain far greater than mine. And yet, they smiled. They showed up. They found ways to be kind even when life hadn't been kind to them. It humbled me. It changed me. One day I was helping paint a community room when a boy, maybe 7 years old, handed me a paper he'd drawn. It was a stick figure with a guitar and a big smile. "It's you," he said. "You look happy." I don't know why that moment hit me so hard. Maybe because it was the first time someone had seen me as happy. Maybe because it was the first time I believed it. I took that drawing home, taped it to the wall. I look at it every day. I also started seeing a therapist. At first, I thought I didn't need to. I was doing fine, I was functioning, I was succeeding. But therapy wasn't about fixing something broken. It was about understanding myself, about learning why I gave so much without asking for enough in return, why I had stayed silent through pain, why I had mistaken being quiet for being strong. I learned that boundaries are not walls, they are bridges. That anger, when acknowledged and understood, can turn into clarity. That I could speak my truth without shouting it. That love, real love, starts from within. It's funny how life folds back on itself. There was one evening, just before winter returned, when I stood outside under the stars, my breath visible, my hands in my coat pockets, and I realized I no longer longed for what was. I didn't want her back. I didn't need closure. I didn't want revenge. I simply wanted peace. And I had it. One of my old friends, who I had slowly reconnected with, said to me, "You're different now, but in a good way. You're quieter, but there's strength in it. It's like you're rooted." Rooted. That word stayed with me. For years, I'd felt like a tree in a storm, bending, breaking, trying to hold on to something that was already gone. But now, I felt grounded. I didn't sway with the winds of other people's choices. I had found my center. I even started mentoring a few young men at work, not just professionally, but emotionally, teaching them that being strong isn't about pretending you're not hurting. It's about allowing space for that hurt and still choosing to show up, still choosing to grow. I never spoke of her by name again, not out of bitterness, but out of release. She had become a chapter, important, yes, but no longer the whole story. I no longer wanted to rewrite the past. I just wanted to keep writing forward. And then, life did what it always does. It circled back. I was at a bookstore downtown, one of those quiet ones with warm lighting and a little cafe in the back. I was flipping through a book of poetry when I felt someone behind me. I turned. It was her, Elena. She looked different. Older, maybe. Tired in a way I couldn't quite name. Her eyes widened when she saw me. She said my name like it was a memory she wasn't sure was real. We stood in silence for a long moment. Then, she spoke. "You look good." I smiled softly. "Thank you." There was no anger in me, no desire to hurt her, no lingering hope, just stillness. She asked if we could sit for coffee. I hesitated, then nodded. Not because I needed to, but because I had nothing to fear. We talked, light things mostly. She mentioned her work, her travels. There were pauses heavy with words unsaid. Eventually, she looked down and whispered, "I was selfish, and I'm sorry." I didn't tell her it was okay, because it wasn't. But I told her I had healed, that I had found peace, and that I wished the same for her, and I meant it. She looked at me like she didn't recognize the man sitting across from her, and in many ways, she didn't. I had become someone new, not despite her leaving, but because of it. When we parted, she reached out for a hug. It was brief, gentle. Then she walked away, and I didn't look back. because the past had already taught me what I needed. And the future, well, that was mine to write now. Time has a way of softening even the sharpest edges. Months turned into years, and with every passing season, I found myself stepping more fully into a life I'd built from quiet ashes. Not a perfect life, but one stitched with purpose, meaning, and depth. The kind of life you don't stumble into, but craft gently, moment by moment, with trembling hands and a steady heart. I was no longer healing. I had healed. Not entirely. Not in the dramatic final scene kind of way, but in the real way. In the way where you wake up one day, and you're no longer tracing the outlines of an old wound. You're no longer haunted by the echo of someone's absence. Instead, you're simply present, whole. I had moved into a new apartment by then. Nothing grand, but it felt like me. The walls were warm in color. There were bookshelves filled with stories I'd grown into. A few plants that, surprisingly, I hadn't killed. Art that didn't match but made sense to my soul. And music, always music, flowing softly from an old speaker, like a heartbeat in the background. I lived gently. I had learned how to say no without guilt, how to rest without shame, how to laugh without fear of losing again. I smiled at strangers. I called my parents more often. I reconnected with friends not to fill a void, but to share the abundance I had discovered within myself. One evening, I found myself sitting on the balcony with a cup of tea, watching the city breathe beneath a sky full of stars. It struck me in that moment how little I needed to feel content. Peace wasn't a place I had arrived at. It was something I had grown into. People often ask what changed me. I think they expect a formula, a three-step plan. But the truth is much simpler and much harder. I chose to stay. With myself, in the pain, in the silence. I didn't run from the ache. I didn't distract myself endlessly. I let the sorrow do its work. And in doing so, I became someone I never imagined I could be. More honest, more compassionate, strong. Not in the way I used to understand strength, but in the way that endures. And then, unexpectedly, beautifully, I fell in love again. It wasn't loud, it wasn't fireworks, it wasn't a whirlwind, it was steady like rainfall on a quiet roof. Her name was Mira. We met at a local workshop for creative writing. She had a laugh that curled at the edges like the pages of an old book. Her presence was calming. We talked about literature, about meaning, about healing. She never asked me to be anything I wasn't. She just saw me and let me be. We took our time. There was no rushing, no performance, no pretending. She understood what it meant to have been broken. She had her own story, her own healing. And somehow, in that mutual understanding, we found a soft place to land. I never thought I would love again. Not like this. Not from a place of fullness rather than need. But there we were, side by side, not completing each other, but complementing each other. One afternoon, I told her everything. Not just about Elena, but about who I had been before, who I had lost, and how I had found myself again. She listened without interrupting, her hand warm in mine. When I finished, she simply said, "Thank you for surviving." I didn't know how much I needed those words. There were moments still when shadows passed through me, when memories came uninvited, when old fears knocked quietly on the door of my mind. But I let them visit and then I let them leave, because I had built a home within myself that didn't belong to the past. And then, one morning, I saw her again. Elena. We were both attending a charity fundraiser in the city, something for education and youth programs. I had been invited as a speaker, sharing my story about emotional resilience and rebuilding. I didn't know she'd be there, but fate has its own rhythm. She approached me after the event, dressed in something elegant, eyes softer than I remembered. There was no awkwardness this time. Just two people standing in the same space, far removed from the people they had once been. "You've really changed," she said quietly. "I had to," I replied. She nodded. I always thought you'd become bitter, angry. I smiled gently. I thought so too, for a while. She paused, then said something I never expected. I was wrong to leave the way I did. I thought I needed something else, someone else, but I didn't realize what I was giving up. I looked at her, really looked, and I felt nothing. Not hate, not longing, not sadness, just calm. You gave up a version of me, I said, but I became someone even I didn't expect, and I'm grateful, because I wouldn't have grown if I hadn't been broken. She lowered her eyes. Do you hate me? No, I said, and I meant it. I thank you. You were the end of something, but also the beginning of everything I became. She blinked, tears forming. But I didn't try to comfort her. That wasn't my role anymore. She had her own healing to do. We said goodbye, not dramatically, just a quiet goodbye, final, full of closure and clean. And I walked away, not as a man escaping something painful, but as a man walking towards something beautiful. That night, I went home to Mira. She greeted me at the door, barefoot, in a hoodie that wasn't hers. We sat on the couch and I told her about seeing Elena. I told her how I felt. She didn't flinch. She just listened and kissed my forehead. You've come far, she whispered. And I had. The truth is, life doesn't always give you back what you lose, but it gives you something better if you let it. The version of yourself that rises from the wreckage. The version of you that knows peace, not because life is perfect, but because you've made peace with its imperfections. This is not a story of revenge. It's not a story of regret. It's a story of remembering your worth, even when someone else forgets it. A story of finding beauty in being alone, not as a punishment, but as a path to wholeness. A story of becoming better, not bitter. And if you're in the thick of it now, if you're aching, crying in the dark, wondering why they didn't choose you, I want you to know something. You will rise. Not quickly. Not without pain, but with purpose. And one day you'll look back and whisper the same words I now carry in my heart. Thank you for leaving, because I found myself in your absence. And what I found was more than I ever lost.